for her talk. Before we start, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. For bathrooms, you exit the door here, you make a right, and as you walk down this hall, there's the men's bathroom comes up first, and then further is the women's bathroom. I'd like all of you to put your cell phones on vibrate or turn off, so we won't get any disruption. Make sure everybody has signed up in our the table. Those who haven't, make sure you do that later at the end. You don't need to do it now. We also had cards for questions and answers, Q&A, and that's how we are going to handle the Q&As. I encourage everybody to write down their questions. Probably after the presentation by our guest speaker, you might spark some more questions. So feel free to maybe wait till then. But if you have already a burning question you want to ask, write it down and make sure you submit it to the registration table. The folks manning it will review it and try to combine those that are of the same question and put it in order. During the question and answers, which Carol and I will handle, Carol will, once she's got the questions lined up, she may ask the person who wrote it, or she may, depending on how many questions, we might just read the card, but we'll play it by ear at that point. Let's see what else. It's a great day, but I'm glad we have AC in here because it's pretty hot outside. So I'd like the other person who's co-emceeing with me is Carol Ojeda. My name is Jaime Diaga. I'm a friend of Akbayan USA, have been for a long time. And when I first met Risa in 2011, I was very impressed with her speech at that time. So I gladly volunteered to help with organizing this event because she has a lot to share with our community, what's going on in the Philippines, but somebody else will introduce her. So I just wanted to, again, my name is Jaime Tiaga. I welcome all of you. And here's Carol to do some welcoming.
Magandang hapon po. Good afternoon to everyone. I also wanted to recognize some of the sponsors and co-sponsors of this event today. The Friends of Akbayan, of course, is the first one. The Filipino American Human Rights Alliance, or FARA. KMB, Kabataang Makabayan. Justice for Filipino American Veterans. Filipino American Press Club of 1978. There's like, well, they're, I think, the oldest. There's like 4 or 5 of them.
That's why you put 78.
Yes. The Carlos Bulosan Book Club. Philippine Independence Day Foundation. Jose P. Rizal Monument Movement. Progressive Asian Network for Action, and the Democratic Socialists of America in LA. Okay, a lot of people are here today, but some of the other folks were not able to make it, but they sent their representatives to read letters and to present certificates of to our wonderful guest today, Senator Risa Hontiveros. So I'd like to recognize the first one, a certificate from the County of Los Angeles Board of Supervisors, Janice Hahn, and Rose Ibanez will be presenting that. For those who are not aware of who the Board of Supervisors are, there's 5 in LA County.
and predominantly all now women, except for one. So I will read this certificate, Senator, from the County of Los Angeles, the Honorable Risa Hontiveros. On behalf of more than 10 million people who live in the 88 cities and 143 unincorporated communities of Los Angeles County, it is my honor and pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you upon the occasion of your visit to Los Angeles County. May friendship, understanding, trade, and tourism prosper between our two nations. Honorable Janice Hahn. But before you leave, the other thing that my husband and I did, we did a book on Filipinos in Carson.
Yeah.
So we want to present to her our book for coming to Carson and knowing more about our history of our families who were established here and established a large Filipino community in Carson. That's for you.
Next, we'd like to recognize a representative from the city of Los Angeles, Jessica Calosa, to present a certificate also of welcome to Senator Hontiveros.
Hi everyone. Magandang hapon. Happy Sunday.
Yes.
So my name is Jessica Calosa. I serve on the Board of Public Works Commission in the City of Los Angeles. I've also asked my colleague, Tita Jocelyn Yaga Rosenthal, who also serves on the Commission with Building and Safety. We're both appointees by Mayor Eric Garcetti, and we're so excited to be here today with the Senator. Before we present our two certificates from the city, we just want to thank you for your work and your advocacy and for continuing to fight for progressive policies because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the popular thing to do. Thank you also for being the bridge to the Philippines. I think it's too often that we are in our own little bubble sometimes and we forget that we have the numbers here in Southern California and that the greatest number of Filipinos reside in Southern California outside of the Philippines. And so it is in our vested interest to know and to care about what's happening in the Philippines, especially when elections happen, because it affects not only us and our families, but to all the other families who don't have a representative here in the United States that don't have the privilege and the right to speak their minds and to be voices to other people. But with that, we would like to thank you again so much for spending time with us. It's truly special and an honor to be with one of the fighters and the advocates in the Philippines and a Filipina too. So thank you. So the first one is actually from Mayor Eric Garcetti. He is also a champion of the Filipino community. Couldn't be here today, but and I'll read it. It says, as the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, on behalf of its 4 million residents, I'm pleased to recognize your efforts and accomplishments, which have been of great benefit to the Filipino and Filipino community. We thank you for your contributions and wish you continued success on your future endeavors. Thank you. And since I'm here also representing the Board of Public Works, it's we're both here representing other appointed officials in the city of Los Angeles. This one is from the board, and it also has a very similar message. And the one thing I won't read it because it's very similar, but I do want to point out that we also have a new female majority with me joining the commission recently. So go women and go Filipinas. Thank
also like to recognize Councilman Jim Deere from the city of Carson, where we are today. Thank you for having us. Okay, I have a cataract on my right eye, so if I can't see any other dignitary, please raise your hand, please present yourself. I don't want to miss recognizing your presence today. And everyone else who made it here today, thank you for coming.
So I'd like to call Jocelyn Diago Rosenthal to introduce our guest speaker, Senator Risa Hontiveros.
Thank you. It's a real honor and privilege to introduce the senator. I will read her very impressive resume, which bears repeating. I know probably all of you have read it, but every word is so meaningful. I reread it. Really, we are so lucky to have a fighter and an advocate in our midst today. Senator Hontiveros is a prominent leader in the fight to defend democracy and human rights, oppose corruption and impunity in government. She is a health and women's rights advocate, a proud activist, and a community champion. She is the Philippines' first socialist female senator. The party she represents, the Akbayan Citizens Action Party list, is a progressive, democratic left organization noted for embracing feminism, human rights, ecological sustainability, and the protection of the marginalized. In her first term as senator, Senator Hontiveros has passed laws to protect the rights of women and children, food safety, universal health care, mental health, and HIV and AIDS policy. So I would like you to join me in giving Senator Hontiveros a very, very robust welcome.
Maraming salamat, President. At magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon, dear kababayan, dear honorary Filipinos, dear friends of the Philippines, and all the wonderful Phil-Americans who are dual citizens, whether legally or not, children of the Philippines and children as well of the United States. Good afternoon to everyone. See, even when things happen, we can continue. A week before I came here, a Chinese vessel rammed into a Philippine fishing boat anchored near Recto Bank in the South China Sea, or West Philippine Sea, within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. 22 Filipino fishing crew were left, in the words, oh, it's okay, I can thank you, it's okay, Carol, salamat. So the 22 Filipino fishermen were left, in the words of the military, to the mercy of the elements, and would have died had they not been rescued 6 hours later by a Vietnamese vessel. That the Chinese vessel has so grievously violated international norms of conduct is, while unfortunate, not surprising. What is truly tragic has been the response of some of our top government officials. President Duterte remained mum about the encounter for several days, only to dismiss it later as a little maritime incident. And then it occurred to me, dear friends and comrades, mga mahal kong mga kababayan, mga kapwa kong nagmamahal kay Inang Bayan, that maritime hit and run is a perfect metaphor for the state of affairs in the Philippines. Yes, right?
Yeah.
Those 22 Filipino fishers are the Filipino people. first victimized by the brute aggression of stronger forces, and then made to suffer further from the callousness of those who should have come to their aid. Na-hit and run na nga, tapos pagdating sa presinto, pagdating sa barangay, hindi pa pinaniwalaan. What a somber way to begin a sharing, but I suppose we all feel nothing but somber today. I'm right in the thick of things, so I feel the stress every day, but I imagine that watching that from afar, watching a country you love, and perhaps still call home, fritter away hard-fought gains. Gains that you also fought for. I know there are some here who are activists from the martial law era. Watching that from afar is its own kind of despair. This is why communities and huddles like this are important. We share our despair, but we also build hope. I thank the friends of Akbayan USA and all the wonderful sponsors and organizers, including my Manong Lito and Manang Team Hontiveros. All of you wonderful sponsors and hosts and organizers for hosting this event. I thank all of you for coming out here to listen and have a conversation with each other. Magandang araw sa ating lahat. Beautiful day, belated Happy Independence Day na rin. I've been asked to speak before you today to talk about the post-midterm elections and the challenges it presents for democracy. But there's a point I want to make clear at the outset. The midterm elections of 2019 were a critical turning point. Yes, but the systematic, deliberate, targeted assault on democracy by the administration was set in motion far long before that. The midterm elections were a major debacle. Malaki-laking hit and run ito. And many Filipinos felt abandoned to the elements. Pero ilang beses na rin tayong ginagalusan. Like a boat punctured repeatedly with tiny holes in its sail, its bow, its hull, with the goal of capsizing it. As that saying goes, death by 1,000 cuts. We will need the whole day or night with beer to talk about these 1,000 cuts and the many ways they make us bleed. But I'd like to focus on 3 particular cuts. The weaponization of the law, the manufacturing of an us versus them, the neutering of the legislature. All these lead to one end, an unchecked, overpowerful executive. Thanos, with all the infinity stones. Cersei, si Daenerys ba, with wildfire. Yay, I'm so glad to hear many Game of Thrones fans in the room. Since 2016, President Duterte and his allies have used the legal system as a weapon against enemies of the administration. The playbook is simple and Marcosian. Stuff the Supreme Court with grateful appointees and rest easy knowing that legal decisions will be ruled in favor of the appointing power. As we all know, the first casualty has been Senator Laila de Lima, outspoken critic of the president, now languishing in jail on charges that were based solely on the testimonies of convicted drug lords. The administration then turned its sights on former Chief Justice Nelu Sereno and used quo warranto proceedings to oust a public official who, according to the Constitution, can only be ousted by impeachment. Maria Risa, Rappler's editor-in-chief, also found herself charged with various cases from tax fraud to cyber libel. And the list goes on and on. Sa totoo lang po, I also have pending criminal cases. Kinasuhan po ako ng dating Justice Secretary Vitaliano Aguirre at ng kanyang mga kaalyado ng kidnapping at wiretapping. Pangit pakinggan, no? Ingat po kayo, you have an accused wiretapper and kidnapper in your midst. The weaponization of the law isn't just to suppress the enemies of the state. A spineless judiciary is also used to rubber stamp executive decisions, no matter how abhorrent. This explains the despicable Supreme Court decisions in the past year, allowing Ferdinand Marcos to be buried at the Libingan ng mga Bayani, affirming the extension of martial law in Mindanao, and acquitting Gloria Macapagal Arroyo of plunder charges. Risa Robles, writing on the effects of a Marcos-led Supreme Court, said, the lickspittle justices and judges, by their silence, acquiescence, or active participation, would enable the regime to get away with wholesale murder, torture, and atrocities. Aren't we feeling just a little bit of deja vu? Now we go to the second cut. Creating a mythical enemy to sow false divisions. This is a populist's go-to ploy, manufacturing an other, creating an us versus them. Since President Duterte assumed the presidency on June 30th, 2016, there are now around 20,000 corpses of persons killed in the name of the war on drugs. How did he manage to get us Filipinos to acquiesce? By demonizing drug users, by lumping drug users and drug traffickers together. Let's watch this video.
Okay, no lookism here.
This ugly face just destroyed it. It's not working anymore.
Okay, just reload.
Yeah, it was working a while ago.
It's working a while ago.
So basically, the president said that he made a historical reference to Hitler massacring millions of Jews. He got the number wrong, but his point was that Hitler massacred millions of Jews, and he said that Philippine drug users probably, yes, 6 was the accurate historical figure of the Holocaust victims. He said that Filipino drug users, Filipinos with problematic drug use, number in the same magnitude, which is wrong, and he said he'd be willing to eliminate them and thereby solve the problem of the Philippines as he presents it to our people. So we've sunk so low that this kind of language, that I'll be willing to massacre 6 million of my compatriots, 6 million of my constituents, this language isn't just deemed acceptable, it's actually applauded. Human rights advocates, foreign or Filipino, are ridiculed and threatened. Strong women are targeted by misogynistic attacks. Fake news is peddled to demonize opposition figures. All of those who are critical of the regime are labeled as the enemy. When we're not ridiculed and insulted, we're threatened and made to feel unsafe. I'm threatened with rape on social media. Hypothetical questions have been asked if my children should be kidnapped. Members of my party, Akbayan, can't even campaign freely on the ground because they are threatened. Save the best for last. Because now we talk about the elections. As you know, the country handed President Duterte an indisputable victory in May of 2019.
They're blocking the projector.
So an indisputable victory of 12-0 in the Senate and an overwhelming supermajority in the House. Come June 30th, there will be only 4 opposition senators in the Senate: Franklin Drilon, Kiko Pangilinan, Laila De Lima, and me. There are 3 independent senators in the majority: Ping Lacson, Grace Poe, Nancy Binay. While they give hope, it's difficult to assume they will always vote with the opposition, especially this early, before the 2022 general elections. What are the implications of this? First of all, charter change would be a done deal if the president wants it. To convene itself into a constituent assembly, a 3/4 vote of all members of Congress is needed. There's still a debate if the House and Senate vote jointly or separately, but even if voting separately prevails, you would still need 6 or more senators to vote against it. There are only 3 opposition senators who can vote on a measure on the floor since Senator Laila is not allowed to. Oo, nabawasan pa. Second, a 2/3 vote of the Senate sitting as an impeachment court is needed to impeach a public official. This means you need 8 senators to stop an impeachment. Vice President Lenny Robredo remains a thorn in the side of the president, so I wouldn't be surprised if impeachment is in the game plan. Third, a 2/3 vote is also necessary to concur in a treaty. This means that the president could enter into any and all treaties, say with China, and be certain of legislative imprimatur. And these are just the big implications. Di pa kasama dito ang pag-expel kay Senator Laila sa Senado, ang pag-box out sa amin sa pag-chair ng iba't ibang Senate committees, at iba pang paraan ng pagpapatahimik at pananakot. Of course, there are the 3 independent majority senators. Hopefully, we can have some issue-based tactical alliances with them. Let me share with you that 2019 elections hit me personally and profoundly as well because my party, Akbayan, suffered its biggest defeat in our history by failing to clinch even 1 seat. We are in the process of assessing our internal deficiencies. But let me tell you this, it now takes 500 million pesos to win in the party list race. The party list system is now being used as an extension of the dynasties. What was once, yes, the domain of the marginalized and underrepresented has been hijacked as well. And yet, we soldier on, all of us. I'm happy and proud to share that in this hostile political environment, my office has managed to pass 13 laws, most of them in the fields of health and women's and children's rights. One of our most important wins is the expanded maternity leave law, which increases the number of paid maternity leave days for Filipinas from the previous 60 to 105, with solo moms getting up to 120 days leave. Fathers and alternate caregivers too can benefit because the mom can allocate up to 7 days of her maternity leave to her husband or partner or another alternate caregiver. Another health-related victory is the mental health law, which is the country's first true national policy on mental health. Through it, mental health programs will now be established at the community level. Curricula will include age-appropriate mental health education, and a dedicated budget for mental health will be allocated. A third triumph we secured is the strengthened Anti-Hospital Deposit Act, which was also successfully passed into law. It increases the penalties of hospitals and medical practitioners who require any form of deposit for treating emergency cases. This squarely addresses cases we previously witnessed of hospitals blatantly asking for deposits before treating their patients. These are just some of our victories in the past 3 years. I've been able to do this while playing a fiscalizer role in the Senate, calling out the executive when necessary, speaking out against corruption and conflict of interest as I see it, protecting our sovereignty and our national interests from Chinese encroachment, as for example, in the West Philippine Sea. Mga kaibigan, I won't lie to you, the next 3 years will be tough. Things will get worse before they get better. We have a president with a popularity rating that is not going down, despite all the issues hurled against him. But this is also what I wanted to share with you. There are Filipinos who will not take this sitting down. There are many of us, some, like me, like us, who have seen the atrocities of the early to dying years of the martial law administration and don't wish to see this visited on the younger generations. And others younger than us who, unlike their president, understand their history. We will not let our country go down without a fight. That is why we need your help. We need your help to sustain the resistance for the next 3 challenging years. And with our unrelenting efforts, with solidarity from all overseas Filipinos, with hope abiding and the spirit unyielding, we persist and we will triumph. This is a boat that will not sink. Maraming pong salamat sa inyong lahat.
Would you please turn the lights, switch back there?
It works.
Yeah, we dimmed the lights so we could see the slides. Thank you very much, Senator Risa Hontiveros, for a very inspiring talk. This will be followed by our Q&A section. So those of you who haven't written your question, probably after hearing the senators, please hand it to Carol or Vicky, who's coming down. Now, putting on these forums costs money. And we would greatly appreciate any help you can do. We are going to pass around the bag. We have Rose and somebody else, maybe Merla or Vicky. So please donate generously. This is for our efforts here in the United States to conduct these community forums, to help us be informed on current events and hopefully be able to invite senators, congresspeople from the Philippines to give us an update on the situation there. It's really best to get that first-hand report. So please do that. So while we're doing this, we are going to start our question and answers. Again, we're going to read it from here because we have your cards. And Carol will moderate how the Q&A will go, and I will help Senator Risa with the mic. Probably all the questions are going to be to you.
For sure. No, this one's for me. Okay, I'm gonna read just in the interest of efficiency. I'm just gonna read your questions, but I will call your name. Before I do that, I saw a person in the back who I'd like to recognize. He's been active in the Justice for Filipino American Veterans. He's been active in the Philippine-China issue and has just been appointed to work on the U.S. Census. Now, we were talking earlier how important the census is, so we need to recognize this guy, Eric La Chica. There, Eric. Okay, first question on federalism. I hear that the president has a plan for federalismo that many democratic forces are critical of. What is this proposal and what is your opinion? Oh, from Bob Wing, sorry.
Thank you, Bob. Akbayan Party, my party, actually, and it's in our party constitution, supports the search for a federal model of government that is appropriate to the Philippines. And we understand that in order to shift to a federal form of government, and there are as many models as there are countries with federal forms of government, to shift to such a form, or for that matter, to shift to a parliamentary form of government, which Akbayan also supports and is enshrined in our party constitution, requires not just drafting a draft constitution and having it ratified by people,
but generating the requirements, say for the shift to federalism on the ground. Just a couple of which are to break up the dynasties and the private armies, the warlord armies in the different parts of the Philippines, so that if and when we shift to a federal model for the Philippines, these are the places, and there are many, where these dynasties and armies rule, will not be insulated from reforms by a strong central government. And we will not leave their constituents, the Filipinos in those areas, simply to the mercy for forever of those dynasties and armies. A second requirement would be financial autonomy, capacity. A recent study done revealed that only 3 of the regions of the Philippines, which are now 17 or 18 regions, these are Central Luzon, which is north of Metro Manila or the National Capital Region, and Southern Tagalog, which is the region south of Metro Manila. Only these 3 are capable of financial autonomy. So if you shift overnight to a federal form, as if it were an automatic cosmetic shift, what are you going to do with the other regions who will be left to fend for themselves? And a third of many requirements, but essential for Democrats and people who are interested in democratic change, is that people understand and buy into the new system, have a stake in the system. And that cannot be rushed. It shouldn't be hurried. It's too important a process. The president has had 3 drafts so far drafted of his idea of a federal form of government. It was just a bit funny at the start of the administration. He was saying, oh, you know, like the federal model of France. This is not a federal model. What exactly does he have in mind? But so far, he has 3 quite different drafts that have been attempted, at least one with the aid of his ally, the former president, Speaker of the House. But so far, thank goodness, people have been able to delay the process, to stop it at least momentarily. And it's ironic for parties like Akbayan to have to do this because we actually support the search for a federal model, but we disagree with the additional political agenda that are hitchhiking on this federal project. Agenda which we see as term extension or some form of institutionalized nationwide martial law, or just wrapping up the president's occasional musing aloud about a revolutionary government, wrapping this up in constitutional garb. And as a last point for the question of Bob, at the start of the administration, I asked for a party-to-party talk with our first Senate President, Coco Pimentel, because Coco is the son of Canene Pimentel, you know, the father of the PDP, which in its true original form was the first truly ideological party in the Philippines, a model for us when we were forming Akbayan. And Canene is arguably the father of Philippine federalism. So we had this talk with Coco, and we expressed to him these concerns of ours. That Coco, you know, there are requirements on the ground that have to be generated. You have to take your time, stop rushing, because if you rush, you will make mistakes, and then you will do a disservice to the valid advocacy of federalism. But I guess either he didn't listen, or maybe he listened, but the president didn't. So we are still facing that challenge right now. Bob, is that you with the hat? Or is that, where is Bob? Oh, I'm so sorry, I've been looking at the wrong person. So we are facing the challenge still. And again, Bob, as the 18th Congress and the president's second half of his administration opens.
Okay, there are 2 questions here. One from Abner Galindo and from Remedy Medina. And it's related to the post-election results. You know? The first one is, the Duterte administration handily won the midterm elections. Is that something expected from a political administration? Does it have a precedent in past administrations? And follow up to that is the second question, why what was the reason for conceding the election results so early? I guess this is referring to the other, the administration supported groups.
Sorry, what was the second part after?
What is
conceding?
What's
Was
the
it
reason
expected?
why early conceded?
Concessions. Yeah. Actually, and you probably heard from different chat groups that supporters of the opposition, Ocho Derecho Senate slate were a bit or not a little bit more disheartened with concessions. I hope that the Ocho Derecho will be able to facilitate dialogues between the candidates and the many supporters, at least to level off on the reasons, because for some, I'm just guessing because I haven't asked them personally yet, maybe for some it was just the thing to do when you lose after an election, but it would be good for them to dialogue with the supporters who until now are raising very valid issues, and Akbayan also filed a motion or manifestation to the Commission on Elections asking them to explain still unexplained strange events that should be explained so that people can truly own the results of the election. The 7-hour downtime of the transparency server, based on anecdotal evidence, many instances or forms of voter disenfranchisement or what voters could interpret as fraud. But of course, the backdrop to this and related to the first question is, was it expected? This is only the second time in the post-war electoral history of the Philippines that an administration has shut out the opposition slate in a midterm elections. Of course, midterm elections are traditionally advantage to the incumbent, but we've always, even during martial law, at least elected one, Ninoy Aquino, at that time. So this was stunning. This was really stunning for us, and similarly for Akbayan to lose for the first time in 21 years of the party list system history. So the kasamas were practically catatonic the evening of the election day when the canvassing was almost completed. So did we expect it? We expected to have a hard time. We expected that the president would have all the advantage, of course, as the incumbent, and the fact that he ran not just 12 candidates, but I don't know, 25 or an embarrassment of candidates, at least 2 slates. And we, and this is on us, no, this was one of our inadequacies, we were able to come up only with 8. So we did a consensus building process. I believe we should have come up with 12, but we came up only with 8. But did we expect to lose all the 8? Did we expect only all 12 of the president to come in? The president has been using his office during these elections, had been using also as a pulpit, but in a way that I think the Constitution did not contemplate that the president conduct himself or herself during elections, because he not only campaigned from his pulpit for his chosen candidates, especially his favorites, but he campaigned against and personally and very strongly against opposition candidates. And then of course the money. There were unbelievable amounts of money that were spent, especially by the administration candidates, and not just during the official campaign period, for which they submitted their SOSE or statement of campaign expenses, but months before, in the pre-campaign period, when the Omnibus Election Code did not yet apply in terms of limits on campaign spending. So there were, candidates who had posters on every other coconut tree, on islands, or who were giving away iPhones and rubber shoes with their names and faces and that of the president on them. There are unverified reports about money coming in from outside, including or especially a country that has taken to ramming our fishermen. So a lot of questions about the quality of the election. But having said all that, I always say, even if it was not a level playing field,
even though if and when we will be able to prove, or the COMELEC will find that there was fraud or there were instances of fraud in this election, as much as or more than fraud or daya, there was talo. We lost. And we have to understand why. We have to own it. We can't explain it away by making excuses or blaming our opponents. After all, what are they supposed to do but oppose us? We wish it were a fairer fight, but it's not. But it's on us. And we have to prepare for 2022 and prepare now. We have to understand, why are we not getting across to more and in deeper ways to our kababayan, to our fellow voters, that would inspire them to go out in greater numbers and vote in greater numbers for alternative candidates. We have to understand what it is about the president that grabs them, to ask more of the right questions, really listen, understand, build consensus, mobilize together, create more basis of unity, because we have been so divided the past 3 years. We have been set upon each other. So we have to build the common ground to enable us to fight better and to win in 2020.
This is kind of related as a follow-up to what you were talking about. Please describe the main opposition and in the social sectors and political forces, especially those that are rising and growing, new alternative opposition. And what are you and Akbayan doing on the ongoing murder and genocide of the poor? So I thought this was kind of related.
Maraming salamat. So I'm glad of the question also about describing the opposition, because it is not and it cannot be, in order to fight effectively, just the traditional opposition. Yes, parties have to be there, but we are not enough. The traditional, I'm so sorry. Binigyan ako ng tubig, natamaan pa kita. Sorry. The traditional parties are not enough. Progressive parties like Akbayan are not enough. I'm glad that distinction was made between the political opposition and what I call the social coalition. Especially the, but just to initially describe, so of course there's the Liberal Party, and I'm glad to see LP here in the USA. There's the Magdalo Party of Sonny Trillanes and Gary Alejano, a good guy who should have been elected to the Senate, a strong partner of ours in the fight to uphold the Hague ruling in the West Philippine Sea vis-a-vis China and other claimant and with other claimant countries. There's Akbayan. So these are three of the parties that are clearly in the opposition. But in addition, and this is where the social forces come in, the social coalition, and where we need to expand, there are formations like Tindig Pilipinas, which I also saw in San Francisco. There are formations like Every Woman, who organized first to defend Laila de Lima and then to sustain criticism of and opposition to the state-sponsored sexism and misogyny from the very highest levels of our government. I believe there's potential to coordinate with, if not organize within institutions, at least one institution, for example, that was our long-standing ally in the anti-dictatorship struggle during the martial law era. And though they are not our allies on any gender issue, they are our allies when it comes to human rights and the extrajudicial killings, the mass murders, the war, not against drugs really, but the war against the poor. And I speak here of the institution of the Catholic Church. Too few among the bishops, but some heroic few like Bishop Pablo Virgilio or Ambo David, who is the Bishop of Caloocan City, which is the ground zero of EJKs in Metro Manila, and a few others of his brother bishops. More among the congregations of men and women religious who, as in the previous
anti-dictatorship struggle were the first to mobilize, first to organize in the basic Christian communities and in the rural areas and eventually in the urban centers, even before the bishops moved. And especially with this West Philippine Sea issue, I really sense a broader and a deeper disenfranchisement among retired military and police officials, especially those who, when they were young, Navy or national defense people, participated in the first rather adventurous efforts to physically stake our claim in different parts of our exclusive economic zone, in different parts of what is now called the West Philippine Sea. They eventually became former Navy FOICs or flag officers in command or former national defense officials. And the different basic sectors, the different social movements. This past election, we had a wonderful, we call it Balik Loob program with our partners in the labor movement who've been fighting for security of tenure and who live in communities that are ravaged by the extrajudicial killings. They, for the first time in 2 or 3 elections, they campaigned heavily for Akbayan in the party list and for selected candidates of Ocho Derecho and what they call labor vote. They had 2 more whom they were supporting from the labor sector. We need to organize and mobilize more among women who are a traditional voting base of alternative political forces, among the youth, we miss them. They didn't turn out in as great numbers as we'd hoped. Some confessed later, oops, they weren't registered, or others were registered, but yeah, didn't vote. The rural sector, we need to have a rural agenda. And most of all, what I want to emphasize and really ask for your active participation in overseas Filipinos, the citizens of the diaspora, those who are able to vote, registered in the overseas absentee voting. You are exposed to more modern, reformed political systems, more mature democracies. You have qualitatively different experiences from us at home, including from your clans who are also living at home. You have more practice, your muscles are stronger as citizens, holding your officials accountable, mobilizing for advocacies that you believe in order to effect change in your legislatures, in your bureaucracies. So your assistance to partner with us in organizing these different sectors, partnering with these different institutions, in educating Filipinos at home about, hey, the much wider spectrum of possibilities that there is, aside from this swing to populism and swing to strongman rule, so easily dismissing democratic institutions and processes or the values of liberal democracy like rule of law, rights and freedoms. And you can help mobilize us. And I say us collectively, Filipinos in the Philippines and Filipinos all over the world. In San Francisco, there was a call by one Phil Am that on July 12 to mobilize outside the Chinese consulates, to call for justice to be done, the Filipino fishermen. And if you mobilize here, and we mobilize parallel at home, it will really be a flexing of the muscle of overseas Filipinos. To what end? For one, to strengthen the political opposition back home and to broaden and strengthen the social coalition back home. With that reduced minority in the Senate and the even bigger supermajority in the House, we can filibuster as much as we want. We will when we must to block or delay damaging agenda of the President in the Congress. But if they push it to a vote, of course, arithmetically, we will always lose. So the pushback
must come from outside the two houses, must come from organized citizens who are educated about these different issues, who are mobilized, and who are able to unite more and more on issues of common concern.
More questions have been coming in, and this is really exciting. I'm going to follow up on what you said about the youth, you know. I got a question here from a writer for the Asian Journal who focuses on young Filipino Americans. The question is, with such polarization, and that's Ray Ann Baroda, with such polarization in Philippine politics, what would you do to encourage people to really pay attention to and think about the work in the next 3 years? And young people around the world are seeing the power of activism in the US, Hong Kong, etc. What message do you have for young Filipino and Filipino Americans?
Thank you. I've felt touched the past 3 days, even since San Francisco up to now, being asked questions like this, because I've also heard and learned a lot from what PhilAms and young PhilAms are doing here in the US, for example, in mental health in the Bay Area. Sorry, what was the first question?
It's
Sorry, yeah.
with such
Message.
polarization,
Polarization,
yeah.
thank you. Young people haven't been spared this polarization, especially with their access to and the access to them by social media, which I was sharing over lunch earlier with Jocelyn and Judith and Jessica and Mac. Yes, and my fellow Athenians, that social media is an original democratic space for us. So no matter the difficulties, we must never surrender it to censorship. But social media has seen such a death of civility in the past several years, and must be regained as a democratic space, as a space for conversation, dialogue, debate, always with mutual respect, and regain civility. So young people haven't been spared the polarization, this us versus them. And I did use the term artificial or mythical deliberately, because not only have citizens been warred against, but have been set upon each other. I think young people either have gotten caught up in or have gotten so turned off by, so some of them just unplug from political discourses. Because maybe if they haven't all articulated it, but we can sense it, it's not about insulting labeling insulting each other as Dilawan or DDS and what other names we call each other across the political divide. I guess those who enjoy that kind of exchange have had our fill in 3 years. Maybe it's time to review, are these really the terms of engagement that will bring us forward? So the polarization has to be recognized for what it is. It's part of where we are right now, and I hope that more Filipinos and PhilAms and other overseas Filipinos, rather than less, will recognize it as a problematic characteristic of where we are right now. We have to recover commonly a respect for the facts. Now, the journalists hate the term fake news because they say, what do fake news is an oxymoron. So we have to recover commonly a respect for evidence, for data, to believe that we can disagree, but we can agree to disagree agreeably, and let's debate with the facts, let's come up with a better idea. It's easier said than done, because we have to break out of not an accidental social media war, but a very deliberate one. It's designed. Content is generated for it, is distributed. The services are paid for. Now, there are of course on both or all sides people who truly believe in in whatever we believe in. But there are also those who are employed, and there are those who are not even human beings. They're bots or they're they're algorithms. So I think we cannot concede the social media space. We have to win it back for facts and for debate based on facts. But we also need to, what I mentioned earlier, talk more to each other, really listen, ask the questions that matter on both sides of a conversation offline. And this is where organizing is essential in our communities, in our sectors, in our institutions. And that includes the youth. They're not just a sector because they're a generation in all the sectors. So my message to the youth, and that includes my 4 kids, is to, over lunch also we were talking about, every generation is made up of the same stuff or basic material or ingredients. Young people today aren't worse than we were when we were young. We aren't better than the generation that came before us. Each generation, including the youth today, have that priceless potential of idealism and passion and intelligence and a longer life than us. So it's important that we get them to fall in love again with citizenship, with observing or participating in government, with being engaged in daily life in all its forms and through all its avenues. So I would just say to them, hang in there, let us hear your voice. Come out and show us the shape of your, if they don't want to call it activism, the shape of your involvement in day-to-day affairs.
How are we doing in time? In terms of time?
I'll let you know.
Okay.
About 45.
Well, in
40
terms of,
minutes.
again, I'm trying to follow up with how the good senator is responding to the questions, and I think this is a perfect follow-up because you're saying fall in love again with doing something positive. Well, I want to introduce you to someone who's done that. James Castillo is a filmmaker and an environmentalist who's gone back to Cebu many times,
I'm still
planting.
part of the Cebu movement to the
Yeah.
side.
And doing planting in the mangroves, So his question is, what can we do to empower the people and help with economic development among the urban poor and the rural areas?
Salamat kaayo, James. What can we do? We can support the efforts of the poor to empower themselves. You as a filmmaker can document or can depict struggles of other rural sectors, peasants, fisherfolk, indigenous peoples, and the urban poor or informal settlers in other countries, in other democracies, or as I love the way Nathan Kimpo describes Philippine democracy, in other contested democracies, where they've said, okay, we, rural poor or urban poor, we're stakeholders, but we're going to try to carve out a space where we are empowered, we have some power, we will gather together what resources we have, try to learn and try some best practices or models, maybe from another country as well, and they are actually running this. For example, one of the reforms that we supported in the previous administration, and I'm just sorry it's not being continued now, was learned in a largely urban poor area of Brazil, the bottom-up budgeting. Do you remember the name of the place? Okay.
Sao Paulo?
Maybe Sao Paulo? Was it Sao Paulo? Okay.
Sao Paulo.
So we can show urban poor and rural poor where peasants have successfully implemented agrarian reform and become agriculturally productive and prospered, where fisher folk are not being rammed by Chinese vessels, but they're able to protect their mangroves and therefore have a healthier fish catch, where indigenous people are recognized by the national government, and society to own their ancestral domains and to design the development program there, and then show it to their counterparts in the Philippines. So it's great that the people, the filmmakers and other artists and cultural workers and other kinds of activists and other citizens before us have planted so many seeds that most of our communities won't be starting from scratch. They're just under tremendous pressure right now. So we really need to vote in and support them.
for their efforts, their long-standing efforts, not to be crushed, but be sustained and even expanded. Even in the next 3 years, which will be really challenging, but they must survive, and let's help them do that.
I'm gonna give you a rest from the hard, difficult questions, so this is gonna be easy. Are you gonna run for president?
Oh my goodness.
That's fine.
I'm going to run for re-election to the Senate in 2022. Please help me. Thank you.
A lot of people here, actually, I saw a few questions here asking, ano ang Akbayan? What is that? What is the party list system?
Okay. Oh my gosh, I want to cry talking about the party list system. The party list system was a beautiful electoral reform mandated by the 1987 Constitution. It was passed into law a decade later, in 1997. Basically, it says that 20% of the House is reserved for representatives who are nominees of parties, whose parties are the candidates, not the individuals like in district first past the post elections. The parties, so the party's track record, the party's platform, that's what we report to the voters at during elections to court their votes. So that was that was an electoral reform like the election automation, like what we want to work on next, campaign finance reform. It is also, the party list system is also for Akbayan, part of what we dream about of moving towards a parliamentary form of government, where we help build a mature party system. We support the emergence of more real parties, which are based on their philosophy or ideology, which have a platform of governance. And these parties are the ones which citizens hold accountable. Parties which can form governments or change them. So that's the party list system. And in the Philippines, it was supposed to be for the marginalized and underrepresented sectors. The sectors of the rural poor, of the urban poor, women, youth, senior citizens, persons with disabilities, LGBT, everybody. Unfortunately, the other everybody came in. The dynasties, the traditional politicians, oh my, yeah. So that's why I feel like crying talking about the party list system, but we still have to decide, are we going to contest it still? If we are, it requires to amend the party list law because it's been so misinterpreted and now wrongly implemented also because of Supreme Court decisions. And Akbayan, so we started to form our party in 1994, 1995, different groups, political blocs, labor, other sectors, some from the original PDP, came together to talk about, many of us came from the boycott tradition whenever it came to elections because during martial law, nobody of us took Marcos's election seriously. Said, maybe electoral struggle, maybe parliamentary struggle is also a way to reform our society, is also a way to repair the damage of martial law after the People Power Revolution. So we formed Akbayan, and then in 1997, we campaigned for the passage of the party list law, and the following year, first registered with the Commission on Elections and ran in the party list election. And we've always been able to place at least 1 up to 3 representatives. And because of the composition of our party, we've always run on a platform and done our priority legislative work as well. A platform of changes emanating from the basic sectors. And that explains the makeup of the laws also that we've been able to push or support in the past 3 years. So it's natural for a representative or a senator of Akbayan to push for universal health care, to push for women's rights, to push for LGBTIQA+ rights, to try to check and balance or fiscalize an overly strong and an often overreaching president because of our understanding
understanding of how a political democracy should be run. So that's Akbayan. We are usually in opposition. Briefly, the previous administration, we entered into a coalition partnership with the Liberals, and we are still there, plus Magdalo, and then the civil society formations that I mentioned to you, that are not the whole, but should be hopefully a core of a broader and stronger political and social coalition.
May I ask a follow-up? 20% of
wait,
12
Dale.
is 2.4.
We need that.
So is it 2 or 3 that gets away?
Oh, 20% of the House, which is around by now almost 300 seats,
And the
260, sorry.
Senate doesn't use it?
Sorry, the Senate is still a first past the post election. Well, Akbayan's dream is if we are able to shift to a parliamentary form of government, then that even the Senate, like our sister parties in the Swedish Social Democrats and the German Social Democrats, the Senate will also be composed by through a party list or proportional representation system.
I think we have time for 4 questions, and so Carol has filtered it down to the last 4.
And I know I may not have called on you individually, or read your individual questions, but in the interest of time, I merged it, and tried to put a summary of similar type questions. So I hope you understand. Okay, this one is about women. It's a question of entrepreneurship. Labor conditions still force many to pursue work often dangerous outside the Philippines. What laws or bills are being pushed to support better labor conditions and economic opportunities, including entrepreneurship? Maybe ending endo, or a promise to end endo. Where is that today?
Oh dear, it's not in the room. It's security of tenure. But over lunch, I met this wonderful young Phil-Am woman, Judith, and she works with...
Actually, I'm the founder.
Hi! Oh, mabuhay ka! I met your colleague over lunch. Mabuhay kayo. So,
What was the first one?
The endo.
Oh, labor conditions pushing.
yes, so sorry? Huh? Yes, so the passage of the expanded maternity leave law was, for Akbayan, as a democratic party, really part and parcel of advancing women's rights and welfare, and women labor's rights, and overall, also creating a more conducive environment for women to have, as a primary option, working in the Philippines. Of course, the other part of the package has to be a security of tenure law. Oh my God, we got it so far, this previous 17th Congress. But there was something funny that happened. We accepted amendments to our version of the security of tenure law in the Senate with the informal agreement that we would be able to amend it further, amend it again in the bicameral conference committee process. But what happened was the House instead adopted the Senate version, and ours was the less good version. Theirs was the better. So I'm afraid there was some bad faith on the part of certain persons there. So basically, we were prevented from completing the process and introducing amendments that our labor partner wanted to be proposed strongly at that last important step of the legislative process. But if and when we finally have a security of tenure law, then an expanded maternity leave would be part of the social protection package for Filipino women working in the Philippines, so that it's sustainable for them. And that's also very important for the women's movement. All our arguments about so-called productive and so-called reproductive work, and then later saying, hey, that's a false divide. It's both just work, but in economic terms, it's also useful to say that, to argue based on that old mythical divide, that in fact, home-based women example, our kabaro, our fellow women who are homemakers all their lives, their work and the work that more and more men are also doing at home, the reproductive work so-called, should be factored, valued, given monetary value in the gross domestic product. And that when our kabaro, or if there are men who will choose to, like many of us, like many women, be full-time homemakers all their lives, when they reach the legislated retirement age, which I also have arguments about, but while there's a retirement age, that they should receive a pension because they work all their lives. While we don't have a security of tenure law, even though there is the expanded maternity leave law, yes, many women are pushed out of the country. There's not necessarily an equally strong pull, like an assurance of decent jobs with proper wages, with proper benefits under the law of their host country, but they're more pushed out from desperation or near desperation because of the lack of decent jobs at home and the need to provide for their families. Even if one spouse or partner is working, often it's not enough, especially for urban poor and especially rural families. It always needs to be a two-income family. So many women, this is observed, the feminization of migration. More and more women go out for those kinds of hazardous work, dangerous work. No, sometimes they go out for one kind of job, they think they're promised, and they end up in another. So many of our kabaro also end up being trafficked or prostituted against their will. So we really need to give women, us women, a better deal at home in the Philippines and abroad. Some of the ways that we've started to do this is to like advocate bilateral social welfare treaties, which means working it out between the Philippine government and each government of the receiving countries. And there are some best practice models of this, also bilateral pension treaties, so that when our kababayan contribute to the pension systems in their host countries, if they decide to go home upon retirement or any time, there's portability of pension, and they can receive their pension either from the private social security system or the government, what's GSI again? Government Service Insurance System at home. And then we're also working on the Senate, because the Senate is the treaty ratifying body in the Philippines, ratifying the conventions. We were part of pushing the ILO Convention 151, which now allows public sector workers in the Philippines to organize. We also supported the passage of the Domestic Workers Convention in the Philippines. So we have domestic workers organizing now in different cities of Metro Manila and different cities in some provinces. They're starting and really taking up leadership positions in the labor movement. And we're working still on the Senate ratifying the domestic, it's another convention.
C-189.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So ILO Convention 189, which is on we were talking about it last.
The rights of domestic workers
So
globally.
okay, also
Yeah.
of domestic work. So I'm mistaken. We haven't
Yeah,
ratified,
ILO
so we're still
Convention.
working on
Ratifying, but
Yes.
you know, the ratification process, it doesn't have like 20 countries to sign. The moment 3 signs, it's okay.
It comes into
So
force.
it comes into force. It's in force now.
Okay, so it's in
Yeah.
force, so we have to play catch up. For the Convention of Public Sector Workers, we were the first in Asia, so that was something. So yes, we those are some of the ways that we're working on supporting women's rights and women's workers' rights while abroad, so that if we can provide decent work at home, then migrating for work, it need not be the only or the best option. It may be equally viable to stay home. And if and when we go abroad to work, then there must be full protections assured
as human beings and as working people.
Thank you, and thank you, Mirna Baldonado. Talking about women being trafficked, the Filipino Worker Center here in Los Angeles has done, is continuing to do a lot of very good work in protecting domestic workers. And if some of you have seen the Maalaala Mo Kaya episode last week.
And the latest was, you know, a woman who was enslaved for 37 years.
yes.
They're a Filipino family.
Right.
65 years.
No,
And it's
37
not
years.
an isolated case. We're finding more and more of these kinds of, even here in the US, that they're being trafficked and enslaved. So anyway, we only have a few more minutes. I have a few more questions here. There's quite a number on the Philippine-China relations, especially in terms of the boat, the sinking of the FB Jember 1. And but I'm hoping that yung Tagalogin ko na, yung sinabi nyo in the beginning suffice to explain what was going on. The other question, actually it's more
Can
like
you please read the question on the West Philippines? That's my question.
there's a lot.
I need her answer because I'm delivering a speech in three Toastmasters Club for 80 to 20 minutes about that incident.
Okay, what is your name, sir?
Bert Buceta.
Okay, I will look for it. Now, in the meantime, let me just do this. There are two comments also that require information on how to contact your office. So you can see if you want to get up and just.
Hi, my name is Jay. I'm her Chief Legislative Officer. So if you need me for any reason to contact the senator, you can just approach me. I can give my
Yeah,
email.
after the And then there was also a comment on doing a dual citizenship campaign for our children, so that we can. There's a quote here this is from Paz, who's from here, local. Claim our roots, claim our history, and claim our future. Empowering everyone. Okay. And before I ask, I'll do that as the last. Okay. Killings of human rights defenders. We're not talking about war on drugs, but there's been a trend of killing lawyers and religious leaders who are working to help poor people who are helping to defend the human rights of Filipinos. So, comments on this, your insight.
Unfortunately, one of the most important or essential values of Philippine society, enshrined in our Constitution, that unfortunately the President has really targeted specifically to denigrate and to devalue, to discredit, is the value of human rights. If you remember that he governed Davao City as its mayor for almost 3 decades, and there are still more than 1,000 unexplained extrajudicial killings there, which Senator Laila investigated as the Commission on Human Rights Chair, and for which offense he has not forgiven her, and why he worked it out that she is still in jail now for more than 2.5 years. If we remember that, then again, it's shocking, but not shocking, but shocking. He makes speeches like that, and it's not empty words. He actually promised to do these things during the campaign, and we elected him. We as a voting population, we elected him. And when you have this systematic violation of human rights, when people stand up to defend the victims, to represent them in court, to campaign for justice for them, then the human rights defenders are targeted as well. And he has made also no bones about it. He attacks not only Agnes Calamar, but human rights workers in the Philippines. And if you are the highest elected official, your words take on the aspect of policy. If you are the highest elected official, and you call on your, especially police or even military personnel, to go after human rights defenders, then it's like putting them on a narco list as for local government officials or suspected drug users and pushers. Then you expose these human rights defenders to injury or worse. So it's really sad, but the president has ultimate command responsibility for this violence, these threats, these lethal incidents against human rights defenders. It's really, as a last point, it's really shocking for us. It makes you want to cry that the values that we thought we had internalized and we had institutionalized, values of human rights, values of gender sensitivity, values of democracy and constitutionalism after the EDSA People Power Revolution, after martial law, that they are so weakened in the face of this attack. So we must defend them. We must rebuild them. It turns out we have to keep working on them every day, every year, not just by 2022. We have to save those who are most vulnerable to human rights violations. We must defend the human rights defenders. We must enable lawyers to operate in an environment of rule of law, and rather than they be rendered victims as well in this breakdown of those values that we started to take for granted, but have been targeted very, very deliberately.
Okay, this is the last question, and I'm combining it. It has to do with the incident in the West Philippine Sea. I'll start. It's from specific, kind of broader take on the issue. Number one, what is the the official Philippine position on the sinking of the vessel? Number two, okay, that's done. Okay. What is the nature today of Philippine relations to China, where there are already building permanent structures to our shores? And what is the position of the country and the administration on the UNCLOS decision? Will he ever assert the claim of the Philippines against China? That's the last question.
I was half joking about who knows what's our government position, but Foreign Affairs Secretary Locsin had a very wise advice to the president not to accept to conduct a joint investigation with China and some third neutral country. How can you do a joint investigation with a country that made up this fantastic fib that 7 or 8 of our low-lying bamboo and wooden vessels swarmed and were harassing a high steel reinforced Chinese vessel, and that it accidentally bumped one of them, causing it to sink, but then they were afraid to rescue our fishermen because we would harass them again. Oh boy, did the Vietnamese video put the lie to that? And as well as did the satellite images. So how can you expect another government which lied about the incident at the outset to be an honest broker at the table and to really search for the truth and seek to make reparations for the incident? Let them do their own investigation. We should do our own parallel investigation. And what third neutral country is that? Cambodia? Russia? Oh my God. Well, enough. I said it would be lutong Macau if that were done. But unfortunately, the president did not follow the advice of the good secretary. So right now, I suppose the official government position is to undertake a joint investigation. Right? Do that. Yeah. Yes. And China, and I don't mean the Chinese people. No, they have their own struggles vis-a-vis their government. But the government in Beijing, they have been for several years now violating our fisheries code, our environmental laws. They have been violating the ruling of the Hague Tribunal that their so-called
so-called 9-9 is not applicable in the West Philippine Sea, in the exclusive economic zone. So how to characterize now the relationship between the two governments? Well, the political relationship is, as Glenda Gloria recently vividly described in Rattler, it's the relationship that the president has with whom he wants to be his followers. His relationship with the Chinese government or with Xi Jinping is that of Xi Jinping being the patron, the padron, with the similar attitudes of obedience, acquiescence, even when the patron has wronged you, and then this irrational belief that the patron will make it up to you somehow, sometime in the whatever future. So it's not a relationship, it's not a political or foreign affairs relationship between equals. And that's what we need our president to do. That's what our government must do. To stand as equal with all others in the region and, hey, the world, to uphold our national interest and to act in solidarity with other governments acting the same way. Economically, it's really very disturbing because there are increasing numbers of Chinese workers entering the Philippines from the main, yeah, baby, makes us cry too. Many illegal Chinese workers taking jobs that under the Constitution should be prioritized to Filipinos who are willing and able to do those jobs. More and more coming in for the POGO, the Philippine Online Gaming Operations. POGO is banned in China but is not yet regulated in the Philippines. So they come in and they do their online gambling there. They've been coming into our cities and municipalities, renting at unbelievable rental rates, houses, apartments, condominium buildings, in effect evicting Filipinos because they double or triple or more the rental rates. But then the dwellings are degraded because 3 or 4 shifts of these workers in much greater numbers than is actually the occupancy, the carrying capacity of the dwelling. So then they are degraded, and not to speak, of course, of the illegal drug trade, where, no big surprise, the biggest source country is actually China. So how come they keep on getting smuggled in while people still keep, suspected small users and pushers still keep getting killed? So there's some hypocrisy going on there. And environmentally, I mean, we properly made a fuss when a U.S. destroyer damaged and destroyed how many square kilometers of coral in the oceans. But, we're being fried twice in our own fat. The Chinese vessels have been breaking up Philippine corals and using them to build permanent runways and structures on our islands. Oh my God, what is that? Why are we tolerating to be insulted as if we are not a sovereign nation like China?
So what's the Congress doing about it?
Resolution upon resolution, pushing for it to be scheduled, to be heard in committee and brought out into plenary. At least once, I think, we had one such resolution that reached plenary and gained signatures of some majority senators of the previous 17th Senate. So on such matters, and you would have heard also from, aside from Senator Pico and me, Senator Ping, talking about this recent issue. So across party lines, it is also possible to build more common grounds, unities, when it comes to matters of national sovereignty. So it's not a very good relationship with the Chinese government right now. So we also watch with great interest the pushback from the Hong Kong people about the extradition bill and China trying to squeeze them in violation of the, what was it called? Was it called the common law? The what law? When the UK transferred Hong Kong over to the mainland, something law where it said one country, 2 systems. They were guaranteed to maintain their autonomy and their democratic political system. And we watch.
Taiwan every once in a while saying, no, we're not a renegade province. So, this Sinofication, so-called, of the region or of
One
the world, it's
China.
important also to us.
One
as
China
Filipinos in the
policy.
Philippines. Well, not one China policy, but we have a MECO. We have with Taiwan, what's the MECO again? Something Economic and Cultural Office representing Taiwan.
You mentioned environmentally and
Yes.
and sorry, I apologize, I failed to include this important question on climate change.
Yes.
And recent reports state that temperatures are rising much higher than anticipated, and that sea levels are threatening our homeland. What can we do here, and what is being done in the Philippines to fight climate change?
So mangroves are an important part of that because not only do they increase the fish catch of fisher folk, but they provide a buffer, especially for most vulnerable countries like us. And the recent study is 9 out of 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change disasters are in Asia. Coastal countries with low-lying areas that will no longer be habitable if the sea levels rise. So maybe for one, let's elect presidents who believe in climate change, who are deniers. Oh my God, this is not a political. Well, at heart, it's a human species survival issue. Because if we don't limit it to, as the scientists, they had to have a world march of scientists to say, what's all this non-evidence-based policy going on? As the scientists have already told us, if we don't limit the increase of the temperature, Mother Earth is having a fever, the planet to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, then all these disasters will come upon us. My kids and I joke that, oh my God, most of the endangered species will probably be safer if our species disappear from the planet. So sad, and the planet won't mourn us, but what about some good stuff that the human species has done, like the Renaissance and Enlightenment? Okay, but so there's a very active environmental movement in the Philippines that is saying, hey, across national boundaries, certainly across political divides, this is one of those issues that should unite people. If we just look at the evidence, the data, the science, which by the way also gives us some tools to mobilize as organized citizens, as sectors. The basic sectors are within national communities the most vulnerable of the vulnerables, fisher folk and indigenous peoples, because they are in the coastal areas, because they are in very natural resource-rich ancestral domains, but not empowered by law to have control, management, decision-making over these in ways which could help the national community, mobilize resources for the national community to do the mitigation and adaptation that is necessary and still possible. We still have a short window of opportunity to save our species, to treat other species on this planet better, and to give back to Mother Earth everything that she has given us, which she was not obliged to do anyway in the first place.
She'll survive.
She'll survive without us. She doesn't need us. That's right. Yeah. On that happy note, she doesn't need us.
Thank you very much, Senator Risa Hontiveros. Please give her Thank you for your deep knowledge on multiple issues. I know we could stay here for hours and have a very good beer. But we only have this till 4, and we would like to end this the forum by singing Ang Bayan Ko. We have words here, so please take and pass it back. Merla is taking care of that aisle. Maybe you can pass it around here. And so I will turn it over to Carol, who will give us a little bit of history of the version that we're going to be singing. So we will, I think it will be opened up by a solo by Art Garcia. And when we get to the section of Ang Bayan Ko, we encourage the whole group to join in. Let's do this as a community singing as our finale. Finale, yeah. So please stand. But Carol's gonna do a brief history about this version. We'll let you know when to stand.
Yeah. So, kung suanayin po muna si Dan, please. Okay, everyone knows the song. Almost everyone in this room knows the song. In fact, it's known as the unofficial second national anthem of the Philippines. But how many of you know the history of this song? And you may or may not choose to answer, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The song has been part of our history. A history of revolutions and struggles of Filipinos, from the Philippine Revolution against Spain in 1898 to the movement for independence from American annexation to the country, to the Japanese opposition during World War II, and yes, to the struggle against the military dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos in 1972. During the martial law years in the Philippines and here in the U.S., anti-martial law forces would sing this song at protests and demonstrations, with the left adding their own spin by including the poem of labor leader Ka Amado Hernandez, Kung Tuyo Na Ang Luha Mo Inang Bayan, or When Your Tears Have Dried My Country or My Motherland. The song became a popular rallying song of protesters that Ferdinand Marcos declared the song to be seditious and banned it from being aired on the airwaves. Public performances of the song were also prohibited, with violators facing potential arrest and detention. We are singing this song today to honor the courage of Captain Junel Insigne and the crew of the FB Gem Verwan fishing boat that was rammed and sunk in the West Philippine Sea by a Chinese paramilitary ship. These men were forced to recant their story after tremendous pressure from the Duterte administration. The lyrics have been passed, and please join us in singing this song. Let's lift our voices and let the world know that we believe and we stand with Captain Insigne and his crew.
Just to add a little about the history of the song, the first paragraph was discovered during the first quarter storm, and at that part I will sing solo. And the last part was culled from the poem of Jose Rizal, Canto de Malakrara. That will be the last stanza, and then the last it will be repeated. So we'll start. Yeah. Let's stand. Bayang kong hirap, Pilipinas ang pangalan, perlas na sila sa taglay karingkan, ngunit sawing palad sa minimiting paglaya. Laging lumuha sa pagkaralita. Ang bayan kong Pilipinas, lupain ng ginto't bulaklak, pag-ibig sa kanyang palad, nag-alay ng ganda. At sa kanyang yumi at ganda, tayo ay nahalina. Bayan ko, binihag ka, nasatlak sa dusa. Ibon Carson,